and gentlemen.
Welcome to the show. It's Movie Wire time. Oh, the Movie Wire. Bring the firing squad. Bill, Justin. Give the finger or laugh or smile. It's time to find out. No more waiting. So here we go. The Sultan of Cinema. The gumshoe of review. Here is Justin Henson. Let's start the show. Let's go.
Welcome to the Movie Wire.
And welcome to this week's edition of the Movie Wire. I'm your host, Justin Henson, and welcome to the show. We've got a big show this week with 3 new movies to review, with all 3 playing in theaters right now. And later this week, I will be releasing a special show with a special guest reviewer from the Talking Smack podcast to cover a couple crappy remakes to avoid on streaming right now. This week on the show, Only Monsters Play God and Del Toro's Frankenstein. That's in limited theatrical release right now, but releases on Netflix November 7th. Who Took Riley Brennan in Shelby Oaks? And finally, it all starts with something magnificent. Emma Stone stars in Bugonia. We've got a big show this week, so let's jump right in. Ready for my verdict? Let's get into it.
Out of the windows to watch a roar and a bursting of flames. The Movie Wire podcast. You need people like me.
The Wire.
And here we go.
Two conspiracy-obsessed young men kidnap the high-powered CEO of a major company, convinced that she is an alien intent on destroying planet Earth. Emma Stone stars in Bugonia.
Good morning, Corey.
Good morning, Michelle.
I believe every company should strive to form a diverse table, to empower people of different skills, and every time, what is it?
Skills and identities.
To foster a new generation of, okay, let's go again.
They want you to think it's you, that it's you who made this world. But it's always been them. All we've lost, all that's been done to us, we're setting that right again. Greetings. Welcome to the headquarters of the human resistance.
Where's my hair?
Your hair has been destroyed to prevent you from contacting your ship.
What ship?
Your mothership?
Okay. In the next 48 hours, the police and the FBI will begin a statewide manhunt. I'm a high-profile female corporate executive. I am crucial. In all humility, I can say that. Think of it like you abducted the governor, but worse. There is no possible scenario where you benefit from this incident.
That was really good. My pulse is racing right now. I've done a ton of research on this. You're killing our planet.
Alien fellas.
I'm not an alien.
You're lying to me.
What's the difference? You know this is crazy. You know this is wrong.
I know who you are. I know what you are.
I know you too, Teddy.
It's fine. It's cool.
Poor Things director Yorgos Lanthimos creates another social commentary here, with once again utilizing Emma Stone as Michelle, a CEO of a pharmaceutical company that created a drug to help solve the opioid pandemic. Michelle's mere presence, even in her most dangerous situations, utilizes dialogue for what would seem to be a robotic customer service line in call center. There's no emotion behind her eyes. There's no emotion behind her dialogue. And this is intentional from our writers Will Tracy and Jang Jun Won, which is beautifully strategic going throughout the film. Which, when it comes to the dialogue's okay, but it doesn't leave much to the imagination. But what it does do well is characterize our characters in a proper mindset, so the audience and viewer can relate to what they're witnessing on screen. When it comes to the dialogue delivery, we have a lower class versus the rich and powerful, and both sides of these characters show up well, and we are bought into this good versus evil, the poor versus the rich. When Emma Stone performs, showing off cold but stern diplomatic dialogue and decision making, we, even to the point, actually realize that we have heard the same generic dialogue once too many times in our lives, as we call customer service lines show frustration to companies, to the point we realize no wonder there's a Karen epidemic, because those are the ones that break through the stereotypical customer service lines. Just maybe if I were to give a conspiracy that the Karens of the world now are the higher intelligent aliens that we don't realize. They're trying to take command of the earth one business at a time. They do a sequel to Bugonia. They should call it Bugonia Code Karen. Our director Lanthimos puts on screen the story of Teddy, played by Jesse Plemons, who has a conflicted past, especially with the company that he so happens to work for. Teddy and his friend Dawn, played by Aiden Delbus, strike up a plan to kidnap Michelle, thinking she is part of an alien race. The film's main intent is to convince the audience that Teddy is mentally ill and unhinged from reality. This is where Dawn plays as his support that shows he has some mental disability, and Teddy is the only one that shows any kind of support towards Dawn. Now, having two guys take a CEO into their home, trying to convince her that she is part of an alien race, this all works, and a powerful CEO using CEO preemptive language to convince them otherwise, it all works here. The premise is there, the idea is there. We have all the elements here, from character to situational wise, to feel like we have seen it before, but it's fresh enough to say, I don't really care. Let's go on this journey to see where this movie's going to take us, because the idea is solid. Where our writers Will Tracy from 2022's The Menu and Jang Jun Won take the old hostage movie and make the motives like a mental illness from a damaged past to create a bigger stake. To the point I was reminded of the underrated 2006 film Bug, starring Ashley Judd, which that film was adapted from a stage play, where a man is held up with a woman in a hotel room where the line between reality and delusion is blurred, as they may or may not have discovered a bug infestation. And in comparison, Bugonia feels like Bug, which feels like a dialogue-driven and situational small-setting play. It feels simplistic and structured, where to an extent this could have almost been a very entertaining stage show, but instead feels like a subtle cat and mouse game that feels like it should have been something bigger. So to an extent, this almost feels like a stage-to-screen adaptation, only played extremely safe. What really separates this from the stage-to-screen feel is the music score. On this episode, I talk about Del Toro's Frankenstein. This is another perfect example of taking a deep theme film and ensuring that the missing elements of engaging dialogue or situational moments is filled with appropriate music that can fill in the gaps. And we get that here from composer Jerskin Fendricks from 2023's Poor Things, that we can feel the missing elements from the dialogue and his score filling in the gaps that need to be filled. Now, this is a borderline distraction for more in-depth character development that we feel we needed more of, but I can admire the insertion of his music to attempt to fill in the gaps. And when we look at the overall screenplay, the main intent from our writers and director is pretty straightforward, of creating a film of situation, where we think it's going to be a battle of wits or CEO versus common man, with the sole intent to be an escape film by Emma Watson. But this is where our writers hold to situational pieces to be formulaic and the hopes and dreams of being a dialogue-driven film, because the movie plays it like a straightforward hostage movie. But as viewers, we know there's going to be a twist. We know there's going to be a gory scene, because as viewers, we're not stupid. We know this is going to go one of a couple ways, where it's either going to be a bloody climax, or there's going to be a twist at the end. And either way, without giving anything away, it is too obvious based on the journey our filmmakers take us that we've already predicted the ending by the time the halfway points happen. Because the movie is so linear and safe, that we know something big has to happen at the end, and the dialogue doesn't really go deep enough to make us curious and thought to distract us from what's going to happen in the second half of the movie. This holds the outcome as well as a 5-year-old holding secrets, because based on the journey, based on the written dialogue, our writers think this is too smart for their own good. For not a lot to happen in the middle to have something happen at the end. Audience members are going to pick up on this, knowing that this, again, is so safe, so linear, they know they have to save it by the time the climax rolls. I have to admit it, this is the type of film that makes it okay, because its intent isn't to make us guess or reinvent the wheel of how to tell a story, but rather have Lanthimos ensure that the idea of messaging from our writers gets a proper vision. And I gotta be straightforward. Here, this works. Those familiar with hostage formulas with a fresher idea might feel this premise to be wasted. But when the last 5 minutes roll, those familiar with the hostage formula likes a good thrill might feel a little disappointed that this premise to be wasted. But when the last 5 minutes roll, I begin to realize that even with the too simple it's obvious ending, the last 5 minutes that I won't give away, was a brilliant move to cap off the film, where it's a literal exclamation mark not on just the film, but how we look at the gift of life. This is where Lanthimos really puts a bow on his visual messaging, where even in silence we reflect on what he has brought to the table in vision. Our writers Tracy and June Wan do the job okay here to build what would lead to the final 5 minutes. Now, whether it's in their script or not, or is just a last-minute call by Lanthimos to really put a bow on this, it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, it works. And it does almost save a lot of the movie and have it directed more in the messaging versus the stakes. The dialogue alone doesn't always work, but rather showcase the talent on what they can do with it. And the performances are fine here. Jesse Plemons continues to demonstrate his range. Does it challenge his range? No. But it is an effective performance. But I do want to give a standout in his first film, Aidan Delbus, as Dawn, who gives a standout performance, one to demonstrate and questions inclusion or morality. Dawn honestly needed more screen time to really solidify the message that Bugonia wanted to prove, and not make it just situational with this character. We do get a lot of simplistic situational points that the movie's dialogue and characters really want to go after. But that could have been even more effective with more interactions from Dawn, Teddy, and Michelle. We needed more of Dawn. The other piece of it is that it is so engulfed into where to take this movie that the dialogue leaves a lot of unanswered questions and breadcrumbs for our characters' past. And some of those questions tend not to be fulfilled in answers, but just leaves us with more curiosity or challenging the audience to read between the lines. Bugonia has a big thought-provoking idea that leaves an even bigger idea during the climax that makes us ponder life itself. And I would call that a success in movie, even though it kind of drags its feet to get us there. But the ending result here in this film makes it worth it. We ponder the question, did the movie give us more to think about in its messaging during the runtime, other than just pump us an idea of life into our brains in the last 10 minutes? And this is a question that really makes or breaks the movie, because it really didn't get us to ponder throughout the movie. It dragged its feet to it, and we feel it could have been more. But at the same time, the performances are solid, the idea is creative with an overused formula, and it does make us appreciate the gift of life. There is a feeling by the time you leave the theater. And lastly, can somebody please tell me what the fuck is with the knitted sweaters that look like re-gifted Christmas presents? Anyway, if you haven't watched the movie, you'll know it when you see it. Anyway, I'm giving Bugonia a solid 3 stars. A woman's obsessive search for her missing sister leads her into a terrifying mystery at the hands of an unknown evil. In Chris Stuckman's first directorial debut comes Shelby Oaks.
I'm so scared. Do you need help?
She finally let me go.
Welcome back to the Paranormal Paranoids. Today we're taking our first foray into the abandoned town of Shelby Oaks.
I've been searching for Riley for the last 12 years. I know my sister's not dead.
Bodies were found outside of Shelby Oaks. Riley Brennan is still missing.
The last night I saw her, she said she saw a man standing in her window, staring at her. Yeah. You live alone out here? Nope. Where is my sister? Riley.
Now, Chris Stuckman is a brave man. It's dangerous territory for a film critic to take on a movie, let alone a horror movie, but I'm sure it's good for his YouTube channel. Legendary film critic Roger Ebert dabbled in writing in a film in the 1970s called Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, directed by Russ Meyer. Now, that was met with mediocre response, but that didn't stop him from winning the Pulitzer in 1975. And Stuckman's film, directed and written by himself, will be met with the same response. Maybe with just out the Pulitzer, but at least he'll get more followers on YouTube. And at the end of the day, it's an admirable attempt by Stuckman. But this is just a misfire, and in the end, a forgettable film. Again, keep in mind, this is the first full-length feature and first feature to be released in theater by Stuckman. Given his YouTube followings and low budget of the picture, this was cause for studios to give a wide release. And this is where I'm going to give my opinion, which is a sad day in film when Del Toro's Frankenstein gets a limited release and this gets a wide release, which goes to show it's not about the vision of the filmmaker, it's about how much money you'll make. But anyway, that's not going to hold to anything against this film. Shelby Oaks starts as a found footage film that meets the traditions and situational pieces of the early 2000s, before the internet and YouTube. This is a time where other found footage films have used the same stuff. It utilizes VHS, where we have Riley, played by Sarah Dern, who films her paranormal investigations until she goes missing. Her sister Maya, played by Camille Sullivan, starts to unravel clues to solve the mystery to her disappearance. This leads to a series of unfocused conversations between characters, unexplained situations that isn't supported by any relevancy, and an unbalance of scares that often confused me on what it wanted to be. It feels like the idea of a scare is always present by Stuckman, but he doesn't know how to execute it on a low budget. Now, we have a good premise, we have an interesting setup like a true found footage horror film, but when Mia takes over the investigation is when things go off balance and off pace. It feels more like a found footage horror movie, and Stuckman has trouble making this feel like a natural build. We get thrown into scenes of who, what, and how, but the why takes a back seat. Stuckman just pushes situation after situation, not leaving breadcrumbs for the viewer to analyze, but loaves of bread, or better yet, a flare gun to leave small questions that are supposed to lead somewhere, but never really does or goes anywhere, or at least nowhere interesting. The strongest point of Shelby Oaks is something we don't get enough of. An abandoned ghost town, a town's decline that turns into a ghost town. What we're missing is atmosphere, setting, showing off some skill of showing us more of this ghost town, this abandoned town, or more of the origin. But instead, what we get is just conversations talking about the setting, talking about the atmosphere, talking about the town, or any resemblance of showing this abandoned town is taking place at night. This is where Stuckman has to show his work. And don't tease the audience by describing it in dialogue. I would read a book if I wanted words to describe a setting. We watch movies so we can see a vision, a version of a setting. But at the same time, the atmosphere of darkness is always there. Actual horror fans might find comfort of spending a film in darkness to give the impression of scares. I can really see what Stuckman wanted to do here, which is to make a hybrid documentary that meets indie horror, which is appropriate given his YouTube status and love for movies, is to attempt to combine the two. but this is one that may have been better being released on his YouTube channel, and even better for the viewer because we can hit fast forward through the middle. But with about a $2 million budget and a $4 million gross, the studio is probably glad they did release this in theater. This is my frustration with this film. It has a middle, it has an end, but it has a pacing problem in the second act, where we get into the investigation and it just seems like filler. Situational dialogue-driven filler, where in the runtime, I could literally walk out of the movie about the 30-minute mark, take a 30-minute nap in my car, walk back in with 20 to 30 minutes left, and still figure out what's going on and predict the outcome. The movie doesn't try hard enough to take an idea and at least try to take some strategic mystery for the audience to chew on as the filmmakers figure out how to take this movie up a notch to either scarier or at least have an intriguing mystery. If this would have come out in the peak of found footage at the early 2000s, maybe I would have been a little bit more gentle with it, since it's an attempt at seeing something new. But the problem here is we have seen these tropes before, and just adding two types of genres here doesn't make it feel fresh just because it's a mix match. The movie tries in its found footage stage to include two found footage movies like 1999's The Blair Witch and 2008's Lake Mungo, by using the lost element and situational scare of Blair Witch and add an emotional capture of Lake Mungo. Then as we get into the movie, we get generic horror tropes that are inserted in between. This is what takes us out of the feel of the movie to really feel a connection. Found footage films immerse us, making us feel like part of the movie. Well, most of the time. And horror films just attempt to entertain us by scares or gore. When you have these two genres combined, you look towards the immersion first, and this is interesting. But then you are stuck with just another generic horror film. And I'm not saying that these two genres are impossible to work, but Stuckman's attempt just doesn't work here. Shelby Oaks for Stuckman's first go-around it's not a bad attempt. It's decently done. It's just misguided and lacks a proper vision, especially in the second act. It will quench horror fans' thirst as big as a glass of warm tap water. It does the job it needs to do if you're looking for a Saturday night late movie after a few drinks at the bar. But this hybrid attempt of a found footage film and a ghost story needs more polishing in the execution department, along with a proper vision of where to take the story, and finally a complete rewrite during the second act. It has a beginning, it has an end, but the dog must have eaten the middle. Those that haven't seen it, it was a bad joke about the dogs in the film. I'm giving Shelby Oaks 2 stars.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
Now, before we get into the rest of the show, make sure you check out my reviews for movies that just became available to rent, buy, or stream now.
Now available on video cassette.
That is just a word. We told you not to talk to strangers in The Black Phone 2. That for an unnecessary sequel, this one actually got it right, receiving 3 stars. The unforgettable true story of UFC legend Wayne Johnson stars in The Smashing Machine, which couldn't find its way to 3 stars, receiving 2.5 stars. Who's a good movie? Who's a good movie? And Good Boy, which had a good dog, good premise, good filmmaking to receive 3 stars. The task is simple: walk or die in the Stephen King adaptation of The Long Walk. That was pretty thrilling for a movie about walking, receiving 3 stars. All's fair when love is war in The Roses, which, call me a romantic, but nothing makes me appreciate relationships more than watching other relationships fight, receiving 3.5 stars. Who can you trust when everyone is a stranger? You know, my parents told me never to talk to strangers, but they should have told me not to watch Strangers to prepare me for this movie that received half a star. It was supposed to be fun, but then 2 pregnant women later in the threesome. And surprise, it's getting threesome stars. I mean 3 stars. Friday's about to get freaky again in Freakier Friday. And the threesome was freakier. Freakier Friday received 1.5 stars. A case that ended it all in The Conjuring Last Rites, which this is the Avengers Endgame for Conjuring fans that satisfies, receiving 3 stars. Greatness demands sacrifice in him, which that must mean everybody that went to see him shines greatness for sacrificing their time for one of the worst movies of the year, receiving half a star. Prepare for launch and welcome to the family in the Fantastic Four that, even with flaws, was a visual spectacle that didn't just focus on our characters looking cool, but the movie in its entirety, receiving 3 stars. No callers are identified, no conversations are recorded, no phone records are kept. Now speak clearly, and when you are finished, say, Go ahead. In Relay, that in my review I relate 2 stars. Go ahead. Welcome to the New West in Americana, that received 2 stars. 3 stars on Sydney Sweeney's Games. Last night at 2:17 a.m., every child from Mrs. Grady's class woke up, got out of bed, went downstairs, opened the front door, walked into the dark, and never came back. One of the best horror movies of the year in Weapons, that received 3.5 stars. The Truth is Messy Business and Ethan Cohen's Honey Don't, that had a great premise and an idea of tone, but made me say by the end, Ethan Cohen, please honey don't, receiving 2.5 stars. Justice Makes Him Wet in the remake to the Leslie Nielsen classic The Naked Gun, which rapid fires gig was only a 50% success, receiving 2.5 stars. Hutch is back and Nobody Ruins His Vacation in Nobody 2, which is an unnecessary sequel but still a lot of fun seeing 2 unexpected action stars like Christopher Lloyd, Fire and Machine Gun, and Bob Odenkirk Kick Some Ass, receiving 3 stars. Karma is a Killer and I Know What You Did Last Summer, overacted, recycled, and brings nothing new to the table except 1.5 stars. Love is hard and breakups are harder, especially when an unnatural force has a plan to keep them together, Together, which will make your date stop holding your hand in the movie, but worth it, receiving 3 stars. Brad Pitt goes vroom vroom in F1 the movie. That was an adrenaline ride, especially given the runtime, and is a feast for the senses, receiving 3.5 stars. And finally, Double the Bad and Double the Fun. I don't know about that one. In The Bad Guys 2, which was just too much to receive 2.5 stars. Now, before we get into the last set of reviews, there is a podcast that is my go-to each and every week. That's with my friend Dan over at the Gaming Views podcast. Make sure to check out Dan from head to toe, and then check out his podcast. The link to that show will be in the description of this episode. But let's hear from Dan over the Gaming Views podcast now.
Welcome to the trailer for Gaming Views. Think of it as the demo level before the real action kicks off.
We're Dan, and every week we're bringing hot takes, breaking news, deep dives, and everything gaming related.
From the biggest headlines to retro classics, hardware breakdowns, and inside scoops on developers, we cover it all.
So level up your gaming knowledge, subscribe to Gaming Views wherever you get your podcasts, and don't miss out.
A brilliant but egotistical scientist brings a creature to life in a monstrous experiment that ultimately leads to the undoing of both creator and his tragic creation. Playing in select theaters now and releases on Netflix on November 7th comes Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein.
I must confess, I never considered what would come after creation.
The great Victor Frankenstein. You made a mistake.
I created something truly horrible.
Not something. Someone. This was the way of the world. It would hunt you and kill you just for being who you are.
I've not yet finished. Much more carnage will ensue.
Think of filmmakers to take on an adaptation of Mary Shelley's classic novel, Del Toro would be at top of mind, at least for me, especially in his writing that knows how to mix an emotional element and have his beautiful vision support his dialogue. Now, your experience with Del Toro's Frankenstein is going to be that of expectation. If we take all the adaptations that have been attempted surrounding Frankenstein's monster, with most treating it like a monster movie or a thriller, here, when it comes to this is not that. Del Toro's Frankenstein is an emotional journey that bleeds into gothic tones to feel dark and gritty. But the emotion that the film brings to the table is that of raw, gritty emotion that doesn't necessarily make us feel good, but rather makes us think inwards towards difference and tolerance. And if we go back in time to the early 1800s or 1818 when the original Frankenstein novel by Shelley came out, where artists had their output, their creative and critical thinking took place, and the relatability piece of it when it comes to artists, even to now when it comes to cinema versus novels back in the early 1800s, this is where messaging almost went in between the lines. A message told between the lines of what's happening in the world and with society. I have to say, when it comes to written words, this is where I've said it in the past. It is easier to analyze words versus a vision of what's being presented visually. We can look at words in a novel, and this will be more specific. It'll take us on a journey. When it comes to the filmmaking process, it's the filmmaker's job to have the music, have the visuals, have the setting, have the performances, tell the story. And that's why there's so many vast opinions on how we view movies. And that is the biggest challenge to filmmakers, is having a vast audience, what you're throwing down. Now, as I was watching Frankenstein, I was taken back when I was in high school, where I attended the Broadway musical of Jekyll and Hyde, where my basic knowledge at the time of this story was surrounding a half-man, half-monster with the theme of good versus evil. And most of the time in cinema, we have seen it as just that. That was my pure knowledge at a simplistic level, which, while watching this musical, opened up my eyes to what Jekyll and Hyde truly was. A tragedy of ambition of creation with inserted side characters to bring a different type of fear. A fear of that of being uncomfortable and emotional. And again, we go back to the 1800s where the emotional aspect of it, of humanity, wasn't really prominent. Jekyll and Hyde, supported by musical numbers that each and every song complemented the intent of the messaging and the themes of the story. Now, in Del Toro's Frankenstein, there is a scene where we have our Dr. Frankenstein, played brilliantly by Oscar Isaac, presenting to the Board of Governors his discovery of bringing life back from the dead, which is the same idea we get from Jekyll and Hyde when Jekyll is presenting his formula in a thrilling musical number, where he has discovered a way to bury the evil, to bury the mental illness, sickness, with a pure formula. But the difference here is that Del Toro uses visuals, lighting, and even audio reactions from the Board of Governors to heighten the stakes instead of musical numbers. In the video and the audio, this needs to be seen in a theater if you can, but I'll get into that in just a second. While Frankenstein played, it gave me the same feeling of awe. But instead of musical numbers, it was Del Toro's visuals that plays like a visual score alongside the characters. This is a gothic visual opera. Everything strategically placed in every moment, in every shot to build the story with the intent to tell the tale of tragedy. There are tons of versions of this story over the ages, but Del Toro's vision is to make it more relevant today as a social commentary in the setting that holds true to the book, but more modern lens, focusing more on a gothic tone, and rightfully so, taking a balance of themes of emotional isolation similarities between our Victor Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster, played again in a standout performance by Jacob Elordi. Isolation coincides with a dark, raw tone that Del Toro amplifies here, from a dark, tall castle, basement dwellings, to a laboratory that's modern, but old, that brilliantly uses Alexandre Desplat's score to tell again a tale that complements and supports our characters' growth and their emotional journey. One of Desplat's scores that stands out as prominent is when we had Victor Frankenstein starting to build his monster in his laboratory. Instead of going to the standard composition route of danger or thrill, we get a light, rambunctious score that matches excitement of our Victor Frankenstein. That score fully Del Toro's vision in place and puts a stamp on what he's trying to do. Of all the pieces matching the vision and ensuring we are all on the journey with our characters, from our shots to the music, to the visuals we see on screen, to even the performances. Now, Frankenstein is told in multiple parts. We have our Victor Frankenstein version and we have our creatures version. And Del Toro does a brilliant job on showing the example of humility outside of isolation between both stories. Both of our characters have examples of isolation. The first half hour or so is pure build of our Victor character and his side of the story. And the last, 45 to 50 minutes is our so-called monsters version. And at times, the monsters version is something we want more of because as human nature, it gives us hope and a better feeling of humility. But the ugliness of ambition, regret, with false hope of being out of isolation for our Victor character, this is crucial to the monsters theme of the story, so it takes up most of the runtime. And as an audience member, it's hard to fault a movie for wanting more screen time of the monster during his version of the story, because it's understandable that we need a build of intent for Victor just to give the monster's intent of knowing that there is something better in the world than just neglect, isolation, treated like a creature. And that is the most simplistic messaging of this movie, is looks can be deceiving if you want to make it that simplistic. And we see examples of that from this version, as we have a blind man played by David Bradley, who sees our creature as an individual that's lost and wants to know the world. The blind man can't see the creature's physical state and treats him as a person needing guidance. And this part I love because getting to the movie, we start the movie with violence, fear, and threat. By the time we get to the climax, Del Toro does a job to perfection, take the audience on a journey of tolerance and acceptance to those that look and act differently, to prove a point that was relevant in 1818 and it's relevant today. There is an amplified message in this movie, but to appease a vast audience, that's what it is at a simplistic level, is that we look at looks and we look at the internal growth and we look at the internal person, if you will. Any audience member, we can deep dive into the messaging of Frankenstein, and there is depth to this movie. But at a surface level, anybody can enjoy the just in-your-face messaging of don't judge a book by its cover. Everybody has a story. That is humanity's greatest lesson that has been told over time. Everybody has a story to be told, and the story isn't always about the appearance of one, but the internal journey one has been on. The only bad comment I have for this film, and it's nothing with the filmmaking, is shame on Netflix for keeping this kind of movie small when it should have been on every theater screen internationally. This deserves to be seen on the big screen with audio that showcases the talents involved. Now, Frankenstein is playing in limited release. It may be in a theater near you. And if, again, you have Frankenstein playing in your area, go see it on the big screen. Seeing it on a home TV, I can predict, won't do this film justice. Del Toro's Frankenstein is a masterpiece when it comes to all the filmmaking elements working alongside each other to create an emotional journey of messaging that holds true to the universal message of humanity, tolerance, and telling the internal story from different perspectives. This is a cinematic win for Netflix, but a strategic release loss for not getting a nationwide release. Del Toro's Frankenstein is one of the best movies of the year.
We got one!
I'm giving Del Toro's Frankenstein 4 stars. And that's a cut on this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I want to thank you for listening and thank you for your support. You can also show support by following me on Instagram, Blue Sky, X, Thread, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Letterboxd at Movie Wire Show. And please don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you haven't yet checked out the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and the Movie Wire's crossover show, Back to the Balcony, make sure you do. Again, the link of that show will be in the description of this episode. Until next week, do me a favor. Make sure you stay for after the credits to show the respect to those that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making a feature film and support your local movie theaters.
Thank you for bringing me to the movies.
Let the credits roll. We say farewell. Join us next time. We'll have more tales to tell.